welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman. Joining us in studio now is Dan Lynch. He's a veteran journalist and newspaper man. He worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer as a chief political writer there. Also was the managing editor at the Albany Times Union and worked as Newsday's New York editor for a number of years as well. And unlike a lot of journalists out there who claim to do a little writing on the side, you've actually published your novel. Yeah. This is one of them anyway. It's called The Mountainside Incident. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
All right, so this is a supernatural thriller here. Yeah. Obviously a departure from your background as a journalist. What made you decide to go down that road?
Well, this is different than anything I've done. Most of my books have been novels, a number have been nonfiction. When I was managing editor of the Times Union in Albany, I also was president of the New York State Society of Newspaper Editors. We did a big series on the Iroquois Nation and brought a number of people from the Mohawk tribe into our annual seminar at Syracuse University. I got to know these guys fairly well. They were fascinating people. The head of the Mohawk Nation at that time was an anthropologist, a PhD in anthropology. And I became quite interested in the way their culture worked, in the way they thought, and in the strength of myth in the lives of so many of these people. Then I began to think about doing a book about it, a novel about it. I wrote the first draft of this novel several years after that, wasn't entirely happy with it, set it aside, and went back with it last year and redid the novel, came away happier with it, and now it's out in the marketplace.
Now, there is some political storytelling going on in here as well. The main character is a woman named Betsy, and she's a political operative.
Absolutely.
And she's the hero of the story, I guess, but she has sort of a checkered background and some moral, questionably activities in her past.
Betsy has a master's in social work from the University of New York and has been working for the legislature trying to push certain social programs. She has been working for a powerful assemblyman from Queens and has found it useful in pushing those programs successfully to become romantically involved with this guy. And he is a character in the novel, although not a central character. This is not an unheard of circumstance in Albany, as anybody who's worked there will tell you. And there was one legislator I recall who found out he had a terminal illness and literally left his girlfriend to another member of the legislature.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, are people going to hear some of these stories in the book and say, I know what he's talking about?
This will ring a lot of bells with a lot of people.
Now, you talked about the Iroquois Nation as well, but you also discussed this demon creature.
Yes.
Does that come directly from the Iroquois mythology?
Yeah. The Iroquois have a legend about a horrible flying monster who is referred to as the Flying Head. And it's a myth that's quite well known among the Indians of the Northeast. I had a friend who came to visit over New Year's, who's half Algonquin. He had heard of this. It's not unknown at all among the Indian peoples, and it's one of their scariest legends, and it seemed to me that it lent itself perfectly to what I had in mind.
Was there anything in particular that began this, where the power goes out and the whole town gets turned upside down?
Well, it occurred to me that a creature like this would be even more terrifying if it had, like an electric eel, the power to control electricity and to wipe out all the things that we take for granted in 21st century society. So this creature has that ability.
Yeah, more so than ever, especially with their phones. You talked about a few other books you've written in the past. One of your nonfiction works was called Running with the Machine, a journalist's eye-opening plunge into politics. Now, I know there's a lot of journalists out there who always have this idea, I'd like to run for office someday, but tell us what to you was the most surprising thing about making that transition from covering politics into being a politician?
Well, it was different once you're inside a campaign. I hadn't expected that I would have a great deal to learn. I was wrong. Among other things, political culture is radically different than the larger culture. It's very much like mob culture. If you look back at Michael Corleone, if he had a problem with somebody, he was never interested in resolving this problem peacefully. He was instead interested in coming up with some mechanism to get this guy from behind and take him out. That's pretty much the way political culture works as well. You go shake hands with somebody, you make a deal, And then if you're clever, you back out the door.
You had
with your
to know
hand
that,
on your
though, covering
wallet.
politics for so long. What was surprising about the fact actually being involved in it?
The difference was that once you are somebody who no longer has a public voice, they're not afraid of you anymore. It's one of the reasons why when that campaign ended, I went back into broadcasting. I hadn't planned on doing that. I figured I'd simply writing books. But it occurred to me it might be useful to spend a couple of years back on talk radio, expressing my point of view about certain individuals in the political firmament, and I did that.
Well, let's draw on some of your experience in talk radio. I want to get your take on some races that are taking place right now in the Northeast, the area you covered for a long time. We got this mayor's race in New York City, where you have Republican Joe Lhota running against Bill de Blasio, Democrat. Obviously, both guys are different than Mayor Bloomberg, who has been such a huge figure despite his stature. He's been a huge figure in New York. How do you see this race playing out, and what do you think it'll mean down the road for New York?
Well, I think there is a possibility that the Republican could win this race. Giuliani won the race as a Republican. But I also think that it's possible that a flying saucer could land in Times Square, and I would rate that as a much likelier event. De Blasio seems to be virtually a sure thing.
And he is talking about rolling back some of the policies of the New York City Police Department. Do you think he's really going to be able to do that once he sits down in that chair and learns the reality of the office?
Well, we'll see. The police department is a venerable institution in New York. It's generally well respected and has been for a very long time. Has a powerful union whose interest is not just in the benefits that its members derive, but also in law enforcement in general. It's part of the way the police union operates. And I think de Blasio may find that an interesting confrontation. We'll see how it goes.
All right, and also let's talk about this Senate race in New Jersey. There was just a big announcement. We spoke of Mayor Bloomberg. He's throwing in $1 million to back Democrat Cory Booker.
Small change for him.
Small change for him, of course. This was supposed to be a runaway for Booker, but now, some people are wondering if he might actually not do so well in this race. What's your take on this one?
Well, my guess is that Booker wins, but he doesn't win by a stunning margin. This will not be a landslide if Booker pulls this off. He's turned out to be a less engaging candidate than he was perceived to be when he initially began to run. And he has annoyed a lot of people. When Senator Lautenberg was nearing his end, he became quite annoyed at Booker because Booker seemed to be in a real hurry to get this seat before Lautenberg had decided he didn't want it anymore. And that irritated a lot of the old-time Democrats in New Jersey, who may or may not knock themselves out on Booker's behalf.
Yeah, I remember right before he passed away, there was some controversy with the family. You alluded to that as well. But this is going to be an interesting race to see what comes of this. And the book is fascinating as well. Was it fun for you to write a novel? More fun than writing nonfiction?
You know what? Depends on the book. This one was the challenge. I'd never written anything like this before. One of the points I wanted to make was that among many of the Native American tribes, there's a total difference in the way they view the world. Rational 21st century humanity looks for logical explanations for everything, and the Native American peoples don't necessarily do that. They don't differentiate much between the waking state and the sleeping state, for example. And even with a great deal of exposure to and integration in 21st century America, their perspectives on these things are different. It's one of the things I wanted to communicate in this book.
Well, there's something for everybody. I mean, as somebody who doesn't normally read a lot of paranormal type books, there's the political aspect of this, which makes it interesting as well. The new book is called The Mountainside Incident. Dan Lynch, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, John.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.